All right. So let's get started with the last day of today's React.js session. And we would go with some introductory topics again. There are two topics that I would like to cover. One is server rendering in React, and one is unit testing with React.js applications. And this unit testing and server rendering, these are like introductory topics because these topics in itself, they're very, deeper discussions. So we would try to set ourselves up in such a way that we are able to, get the server rendering and unit testing done introduction wise. We are not going deeper into that, but I would give you links where you can find out more details regarding the same. So let me just create a day 12 folder, and let me create a topics file. Now the things that we're going to go for, let's say agenda wise, is first we'd go with unit testing, in which we'd be covering two things, JEST and Enzyme. This again, as I said, it's not a discussion on unit testing itself, but mainly it is on how to implement unit testing frameworks or libraries in React. All right, JEST and Enzyme being two of the very popular libraries as far as unit testing with React is concerned. So JEST, Enzyme, and we then go for server rendering, server-side rendering, which would be mainly a framework called Next.js. We'll see what that is. It's a React.js framework. It's a very popular one. I've seen certain front-end development companies, most of them which are shopping carts, like e-commerce companies, using Next.js as a framework. And e-commerce companies, if they are developing things in React, there has to be some server-side rendering in picture as well, so that it is SEO, like search engine optimized. And that's why this Next.js comes into the picture. All right, so we'll see what that is or how the things work together. Let's go for unit testing, and then let's talk about this. And as far as JEST and Enzyme are concerned, there are certain functions that we'll be using in both of the libraries. So JEST would be we'd be seeing functions like describe, it, and expect. Now, some of people might be familiar with these functions. These are pretty generic. If you're doing unit testing in Angular or Node.js, these functions would still come into the picture. All right. Then there are some of the other generic functions, like before all, or before each, after each, before all, after all, and so on. And Enzyme has a couple of concepts that we need to learn. One is called deep mounting, or deep rendering would be a better word. Deep rendering, which is basically a mount method in Enzyme. And then there is something called shallow rendering, which is a method called shallow in Enzyme. We'll see what deep rendering and shallow rendering is. Very useful techniques for mounting the components in an optimized manner. And Next.js, we'd set up a project in Next.js as well, and we'll see how things go with this whole server rendering aspect. And as far as unit testing is concerned, we'd be going for just a very basic example again to focus on the unit testing aspect of things rather than the features. So we'll go for a very basic counter example, and then we'd be testing that particular thing with JEST. Yep. So this is pretty much it. But before going into the JEST and all, I would just like to show you one thing. If I check out some other frameworks, like for example, Mocha, JS.org, you'd find a similar pattern as far as Mocha is concerned in JEST as well. So let me just go for getting started. You can see that there is a describe it, and instead of expect, there is something called assert, but it can well be expect as well. We'll see what this assert or expect is. There is also something called Jasmine. Jasmine also would have a similar syntax. You can see that describe it and expect. And what we are going to use is JS.io. This is a Facebook product, by the way. And it is a Facebook open source product used with Facebook's React Plus. There are like other frameworks and libraries. Originally, it was used with React itself, but nowadays Angular, Vue, and Node.js, and every framework is supported in here. I mean, it doesn't actually really matter. It's not a big deal. This, when it's used with React, it can be used with any other JavaScript ecosystem. So the point being that this Jasmine, which is more or less used with Angular, and Mocha, which is most of the time used with Node.js, these frameworks can also be interchanged to different platforms. Like Jasmine can be used in React, Mocha can be used with React, and JEST can be used on Node.js applications. That can be done because the syntax is similar and the language is also the same. So if you are clear with one specific unit testing library or a framework, then you don't have to have that learning curve to get the other frameworks while working on other types of technologies, be it front end or back end. It should be JavaScript. All right. So JEST or any other unit testing framework in JavaScript has almost the same syntax. Now, this being generic, Enzyme is very specific to React, and the Enzyme cannot be used in any other platform. And Enzyme, by the way, it's an Airbnb product. So if I go for Airbnb we know that there is a website called Airbnb.com, which is almost the same as Oyo rooms kind of a thing, but it's better than the whole system internally. It's a better one as far as Oyo is concerned and Airbnb is concerned. So Airbnb, it's an international company. It's been in the market since quite long, very mature, and it has all these features and all. You can also go for India as well if you want to. And yeah, this one is airbnb.co.in, so it is an Indian version, by the way, but this is made in React. You can see that the React developer tool icons get highlighted. So Airbnb itself is made in React, and I'm not sure if you've heard of Airbnb or not, but this is a very prominent website in the hotel business and renting the rooms and all. So this airbnb.com or .co.in has its own development platform, which is airbnb.io. This is basically a set of libraries that Airbnb has to offer for React.js and other types of development. Right? There are so many libraries that Airbnb has created, the team of engineers at Airbnb has created. The one that we would be using is Enzyme. All right, JavaScript testing utilities for React, very specific to React. All right, so I will just keep it here. The GitHub and the documentation, very useful. I'll just keep this link inside our documentation. So while JEST is pretty generic, you can use it in any platform. Enzyme is very specific to React, and it's been used only in React. I would also like to just get the Next.js website also listed in here. Next.js, by the way, it is something that is suggested by React. It's a React.js framework for production. Very good framework. And it helps you to bring the SSR, like server-side programming, up and running. So it's a cool way of going for server-side programming, and we'll see what is server-side rendering and all. So Next.js helps us doing that. And this, by the way, it is mentioned in the React.js documents as well, specifically. So if I go to reactjs.org, and if I go to the docs, you would see that create a new React app. It has specified that a toolchain with Node.js like Next can be used. There is also one called Gatsby, by the way, and then there are others as well. All right, but there is a gatsbyjs.com website as well that is also almost equivalent to Next, but I have seen people using Next more than Gatsby, because Next again provides that control, and Gatsby has something more or less similar to Angular, where it has a Gatsby CLI. You can create components, and all those kind of things can be done. All right, so Next and Gatsby almost used for the same purpose, but Next is more popular because it provides more control to the developer than Gatsby. And React.js developers are on that mindset only, like they will need more control at any point in time. So Next.js is something that we are going to go for some basic website. Like with Next.js, there is a create next app kind of a library, like create React app is, and we'll see how that can be done. Right, pretty easy. Nothing to learn as such in there. There's no learning curve, but it's interesting to know what it is. All right, so this being said and done, this is the agenda for today. So I believe everyone is clear on the agenda for today. Yes? All right, very good. So here again, I'd go for a create React app, and then create React app already has Jest available for us. Enzyme is something that we'd have to install externally. But first, we'd just talk about Jest. So let's do a unit testing demo application. Let's wait for it to get created. Lately, what has happened is React.js, the process of creating a React app has become lengthier. Earlier, it was something that didn't take that much of a time. But because of one additional dependency, which is called CRA template, and then it is removed as well from the project, that is something that takes more or less the time that we have. But it has been something that has been bugging me a lot. And with the streaming and all going on, it will take again more time. But let's wait for it to get done. And you can also see certain testing related libraries are now installed. And now it's removing CRA template as well, which is quite annoying. There might be something on this. Any reason, specific reason would be there to get this kind of a system going. All right, and I'd go for, I'll CD into, is there a concept of data streaming? Yes, I mean, it's not technically streaming, though it works on the basis of a stream. There's something called a WebSocket, but then again, that is something which is implemented on the server side with a framework called Socket.io, and the client just consumes the socket. So there is a socket client also you can install in your client application, and your server would have a socket server. And that way you can stream data across the client and the server. So so that is more or less real time. But then for streaming purposes, specifically like video streaming and all, that is again a different story. There are so many streaming mechanisms. Like there could be WebRTC that you can use. There could be RTMP servers that you can create. But the client is actually something that doesn't do anything other than consuming the stream, be it of socket communication or be it of this video streaming or content streaming kind of a thing. More or less it is on the server side. All right, I would CD into unit testing demo, and instead of going for a yarn start this time around, I'd go for a yarn test. That would start my test runner, and that would give me the results of the test cases. So if I just run all the test cases pressing A, you can see that it runs one test file, that is app.test.js. So which means that any file .test.js is something that is picked up and is run. So you can see if I open it up in my editor, let me just also put this on the side. All right. So you would be able to see that here the file that is app.test.js inside the src, it is taken and it is run by the test runner. And we can create any file .test.js, and that will simply run. So instead of so the eventual thing that we need to do is we need to test our component, but instead of testing the component right away, I would just try to create a small hello.test.js program that would actually create a very basic function. It will test that function out. A very basic exercise, but that would give you an idea on the syntax of describe, it, and expect together. And then we would like to create a component, maybe a counter component, and then we'd like to test that as per React.js way of going for things, combining the describe, it, and expect, and also enzyme later down the line. So first we'll go for a very simple file. We'll call it hello.test.js. And as soon as I create that file, hello.test, you can see on the side, on the right side, the hello.test.js is also running now. But then hello.test.js doesn't have anything written in there, and that would simply fail the whole test case because it didn't find any test case. So you'd have to just wait and it will fail. There you go. One test case, which is inside the app.test.js, it is passing, and one test case is failing. Now, there is a test function in JEST available as well that would also be representing the test case, but we'd go with the more generic approach, that is describe, it, expect kind of an approach. And in this test function, what it is simply doing is it is getting the rendered app, and it is getting an element by text, that is learn React. And we just are checking that in the text, this is a regular expression, by the way, case insensitive regular expression. So if there is any element which has a text called learn React, we just would be passing the test. So if I check out the app.js, you can see that there is an anchor tag that has learn React written inside it, and hence the test is passing. Otherwise the test would be failing. Hello.test.js is something that is failing it altogether because there's nothing written in here. So I would just create one function, const add a comma b is equal to, or returns a plus b. So this is a function that would always pass, and I'm just creating this function in here, and I'll be testing this function in here as well. But usually there would be another file where you'd be creating your components or services or anything, and you'd be testing the services, components, etc. in another file, importing them. So as of now, we're just demonstrating certain stuff. So test.js is something that we are going to create separately. And in here, I would like to use that describe, it, expect combination to make it clear. So first of all, what is describe, it, and expect? So if we talk about this it statement, it function, it is your test case. All right, the test case that you want to write, the unit test case. Describe is a group of test cases. It is generally called a test suite. And expect is the assertion library, or an assertion function in this case. So the job of an assertion function is to assert a condition or an expression with some expected value. If the expression returns that expected value, then this is fine. I mean, the whole test case passes. But if it doesn't, then the assertion function would throw an exception, and the test case eventually would be failing. So this whole thing goes like this. Like it, let's say, adds two numbers correctly. All right, that is your name of the test case. You can have as long test case name as possible, as descriptive as possible. And the second argument is a callback function. All right, this is a callback function, and the callback function would have the expectation set. So expect add into the bracket 10 comma 20 to be 30. All right, so to be greater than, to be less than, to equal. There are so many expectation functions that are available. But what this would do is this would basically pass your test case. You see that two test cases have ran, two test cases have passed. There's no failing whatsoever. Now, if we also check about, like, if we, for example, want to go for another function to be put in here. Let's say some other test case, like for example, add without any argument may be returning us not a number, for example. So like it returns NaN, that is not a number, if no arguments passed. All right, and then a callback function. Also, these are like multiple test cases, so better group it together in a test suite. So it'll be something like describe, let's say hello, or arithmetic, whatever the name of the category you want to keep in, you can keep in. And both the test cases or any test case that you want in this test suite goes in there. So now say for example, if I let's say expect add without an argument, if I say to be 0, for example, which would not be 0, this would simply return me an error because no arguments passed. It'll just return me not a number. All right, let me just save it, and you would see on the side that this test case would fail. Let's wait for a while, and there we go. This is failing, and I believe everyone is familiar with this NaN data type, right? It expected 0, but it received NaN, and this would always give you not a number because both A and B, while we do not pass them, they are undefined. So undefined plus undefined is NaN, and I believe everyone is familiar with this NaN data type in JavaScript, right? It's basically not a number. Right, you might have come across this situation where if the arithmetic is not possible, JavaScript just returns not a number. So we can actually check for not a number. We can go for to be NaN. That's what we want to test, and we'd be able to test that. And there you go, the test cases are passing. So now we would like to expand this whole thing to a component based testing scenario. But first, I would just like to know from you all that this describe it and expect combination, this whole thing is pretty much clear to everyone. Yes? All right. And we would like to now go for creation of that component. And that is also part of the reason why I create a folder first and then I go for all the component creation in there. Like there should be a folder, there should be a JSX file, and then there should be a counter.test.js file as well. So first I'll just create the JSX, and this can well be a functional component as well. This requires the state, but you can use the use state hook with a functional component. But if it is a class component, this would help us to understand unit testing better. So let me just create this as a class component. Import React and component from React class counter extends component. Render would return, let's say, an h1. H1 would have the state of the counter and a couple of buttons, plus and minus, and export default counter. All right, and this would have a state. Value can be 0, and we can put that state's value in here. And we can have a couple of methods. and we'd also have decrement. All right, and we'd be calling those methods in here on click respectively. We'll go for this dot increment, this dot decrement. All right, something like this. So as of now, there's no test case written and there'll be no test case that'll be passing or anything like that. But I believe this counter component that I've created over here, it's a very simple component. I believe this is clear to all first off. All right. So now we'll write a test case for the counter.jsx, and the unit testing scenario generally works very well with object-oriented programming implementation. And because we are creating a class over here, it'll be really simple to create objects. So the whole aim of unit testing is basically to create objects, expect something out of the properties, fire some methods of the object, and then expect something else out of the properties. So that is the whole approach that we generally follow for object-oriented programming and unit testing together. So it'll be something like counter.test.js, and in here I can go for importing the counter component from counter.jsx, and I can go for a describe. Right now it'll give you an error with a failing test case because there's nothing written in here as a test case itself. Counter component. And there are a couple of test cases that I want to accomplish here. That one is that the counter is initialized by 0, and the other is the counter increments correctly or not. So if I go for something like it initializes by 0, I can go for something like const counter is equal to new counter. I'm creating an object, and then I can expect counter.state.value to be 0. So this would definitely pass because the initial value of the state's value property of the counter object is 0. But there will be some problem once we go for the increment or decrement. Now this is certainly passing, and this is totally valid, but the approach that we are using, it's a bit of a messed up one. So we might want to change our approach in creating or instantiating the counter. Let's see. This test case would change it. So increments correctly. All right. And if I go for const counter, and you see that I again have to create a new counter. So better way is that I can go for something on a higher scope, where I can go for let counter is null, and I can go for something like before each we'll have a callback, and counter is equal to new counter. So this kind of a thing can be done so that you don't have to use the initialization everywhere. All right, so before each would come into picture at this point, and then there is after each as well, before all, after all. Those things can be done as well. But what I can do is now I can go for something like counter.increment 4 times, for example, and then I expect counter.state.value to be. So what do you think we should have the counter.state.value to be? Anyone, any ideas? Four. All right, I think everyone should agree with Rita on this. Like 4 seems to be logical, something like this. But once we do that, let's see the problem that we face. You can see that this this whole counter increment, that is the counter components increments correctly test case, it expected 4, but it received 0. So the main problem that happened was this whole function cannot call set state unless the component is not mounted. So there's a warning. Let me just copy that warning, paste it in here. So you can see that it can't call set state on a component that is not mounted yet. So what it tells us is that the mounting of the component is a process that React does. And what we have done is we have not mounted the component, but we have just simply created a new object out of the component class, and that's it. So React does create a new object out of the component class, but it also does something else as well. Like the whole process is mounting the component, where you get the HTML of the component back and it is mounted into the DOM of your component. So we are not doing that, and that's why the whole thing is failing. Like this is fine, like this is very synchronous kind of a thing, but the set state and all, it's only possible after you mount a component. Moreover, when we test components, the way we have to test the components are through HTML. Like we should get the HTML of the component and maybe check whether the H1 is something or not, or maybe click on the button and then check whether it is incrementing or not. So it has to be unit testing also. If it has to be done, it has to be done through HTML and not through the properties. So these two reasons, one is that we are not mounting the things correctly, plus the second reason is we are not testing the HTML of the component, that is the ultimate output, but instead we are checking the properties of the component. So those are the two problems which are actually not going to work as far as components test cases are concerned. So first off, I should just confirm from you that you are clear on why this is not working first off, and what is our mistake, which we would rectify. But everyone is clear on our mistakes? Okay, very good. What about the participants? Everyone gets that we are missing something as far as mounting the component. We are not doing that, and we are just creating an instance of the counter component. Now, remember, React would create an instance, but it would also prepare your DOM in such a way that your component is mounted. All right. So in order to get that whole component mounting feel going, it is Enzyme that we'd be using. So let me just minimize this and let me just show you what we'd be going for as far as Enzyme is concerned. And I can go for Enzyme.js, and I can right away go into the GitHub repo. GitHub has a better, documentation that is available. It is open source again. So now we can first install Enzyme and Enzyme adapter for React 16. Enzyme, again, remember it's specifically for React. So Enzyme plus the current version adapter. There are so many other adapters also available, and then we can configure the Enzyme in one file. There's a file which can be used for single time run. That is the configuration file, which we'll see where we'd be doing it. And then we can run so many tests. We can render certain components. We can do mount and shallow. We'll see what is mount and shallow and all. It also asks us to export or import expect from chai, but jest already has expect, so we don't have to basically import that. We'd also like to simulate click events and all. So there are so many things that are available. So I would like you to go through this whole Enzyme documentation. It's a very good one. But what we would do is we'd first import Enzyme adapter for React 16, and we'd configure Enzyme. All right. So let's do that. Let me just import yarn add dev. Now yarn add dev means that what we are trying to do in here is we are trying to install a development dependency, and that dev dependency is Enzyme and Enzyme adapter for React 16. I'll just copy them. We don't want it as a production dependency, just like it to have as a dev dependency. Let's install them. Wait for it to get installed. Okay. So, all right. So first, like the thing is, first we should have to go for the configuration, and this configuration basically has to run before all the test cases are running. So either you can go for it in the counter.test.js, and which means that you'd have to go for the whole enzyme configuration in all the .test.js files. So that is something that you can do. But then there is another file which is setuptests.js. Now the setuptest.js, it is something that would run every time your test cases are run. This is the first file that is basically something that will be running. So all the configuration related things can be done in this particular setuptest.js file itself. And you know, this whole JEST DOM extend expect, this command adds that expect statement to our test cases so that we can go for that expect statement altogether. So that's why, because of this import, is that expect that is available to us. And similarly, we'd go for the configuration. Let me just copy this and let me paste it in here. So enzyme adapter for React 16 is imported, enzyme is imported, and we are configuring enzyme. And that's the configuration that we want to go for. So this being done, all our test cases would run with the enzyme configuration, and hence we can right away use the exact syntax to mount the component inside this counter.test.js. So what we would do is we'd import, I would import mount to start with from enzyme, but there is also a shallow function I'll import. We'll see what that is. So mount from enzyme, and I'm also importing counter, and this is what I'll be doing before each test case. Mount counter. So basically I'm trying to mount the counter as if React would mount it. So enzyme provides us a mimicking mechanism. It mimics the way React mounts a component. So the thing is, like, I'm trying to use JSX in here, and I'm trying to mount the component the React way. And if I save this, you'd see that I'll give you a very familiar error. Let's first try and see that error, and then let's try and solve that. And if I go right at the top, I think, yep, you can see here, reference error, React is not defined. So here we are trying to use something like JSX, React.createElement kind of a thing is what we are trying to do in here. And we are not having React in this file. So in order to have this mounted, we'd have to also import React. So it doesn't have any problem creating that particular JSX for us. And for a while, I'll just comment out the increments correctly test case. And this would anyways pass, but this is not the correct way, as we know. What we want is the output of the component to get us the expectation correctly. So state.value to be 0 would still pass, but what I want is the HTML output. And then I want the whole, you know, the output of the component's expect statement. So it anyways gives you a problem like state.value is undefined. And let's see what is there. If I go for something like, so basically this would not work now. If I just do a console log of counter, and remember the counter is something that we have mounted. All right. So if I do a console log, you'd see that you'd get something called a wrapper, a React wrapper probably. Let's wait for it. All right. You can see in the console log src line number 13, we're getting a React wrapper. Now this React wrapper that we are having, it is almost equivalent. So if I say React wrapper, and later on we'll also get a shallow wrapper. All right. So this one is almost equivalent to a jQuery's dollar and a selector. All right. So I believe everyone has used jQuery once in their lifetime, and dollar and the selector, like dollar, if I want to select the whole counters HTML, we get this, and then inside jQuery you can go for like find something, you know, and so on and so forth. That can be done, or first, or click, or those kind of things can be done, or value or something like that, right? So I believe this dollar selector kind of a mechanism in jQuery is, everyone is familiar to that. We can select elements based on this $selector in jQuery, right? All right. I believe this $selector is something that everyone is familiar with. You can select by ID, you can select by class name, you can select by element name as well, right, everyone? Right, because that is something which, and Airbnb developers also, thought that jQuery is the most familiar syntax for any developer. So let's base the whole syntax of Enzyme, on top of jQuery. So it's not jQuery that we're using, but the syntax is familiar to jQuery, like the same way that JSX is familiar to HTML. The Airbnb's Enzyme syntax is more or less familiar to jQuery. So I can do something like counter.html. jQuery has an HTML method that would give you the whole HTML of the counter. Let's wait. And there you go. H1, 0, button plus, button minus, the whole HTML is presented to us, out of which we just want to find the H1's HTML in this case. So find, we're finding an H1 element in here. Oops. All right, H1. So from the counter wrapper, we are finding H1 and we are going for the HTML of that H1 only. So obviously we'll be getting just the HTML of the H1 element, as you see here now, H1 0/H1. So again, we are not interested in the HTML, but what we are interested in is the text of the H1. So I'll just go with the text property or text method. Again, a similar method is available in jQuery as well. All right, and there you go. This is a text that is 0. So remember, this is a text and not a number. HTML, everything is a text, by the way. So we can expect this to be 0. This is a text and we are expecting it to be 0, like so. And this test case would pass. All right, there you go. All the test cases are passing now. And this, everyone I believe would agree that this is the correct way of going for a test case in a component, the way we mimic the React's mounting, and then we actually evaluate the HTML of the component rather than evaluating the properties of the component class. All right. So first of all, I believe everyone agrees that this is a better way of going for the React component testing rather than the previous way that we were doing, right? And also everyone understands this test case. All right. What about other participants? Everyone gets this? Very good. What about other participants? All right. So again, now we know that this is again not a good way to go for it. The way we want to test increment is, first of all, get that button. And then once the button is available, we try and simulate the click event on the button. And then we see if the counter has incremented or not. So definitely this would not work. But the way we do it is it increments correctly. And in here, first of all, what I need to do is maybe go for counter.find. I'm trying to find a button. But the thing is, when I find a button, because button, there are two buttons. There are two button tags that are there. So I think it should give me a collection. Oh, Yeah, it would not show you the collection. But if I try to, let's say, get the HTML of that button, this would simply not work, because now it will give you an error. Let's see. Because there are two buttons that we have, the error might say that because it's a collection, you might not be able to go for the HTML property or something like that. Let's wait for it. Method HTML is meant to be run on one node, but two nodes found instead. All right, you can see this error. The method HTML is meant to be run on one node, but two nodes are found. And the simple reason is that there are two buttons and two button tags. So what I'm trying to do here is I'll just try to go for the first button. First is also a method in jQuery, by the way. So let's wait for this. This should give us the first button's HTML. And there you go, the plus button. Here is the HTML that the plus button has. And we again are not interested in the HTML of it, but what we want to do is we would like to simulate a click event on the button. So it'll be like simulate. Now simulate is not a function in HTML, but we would like to simulate an event that is click. This is an enzyme specific thing, enzyme and React specific. So it is simulate is not even in jQuery and anything like that. So when I simulate a click, and say for example, if I do a console.log of HTML's text, so what I'm doing is I'm simulating a click event, and I'm finding that H1 again, displaying the text of H1. This is actually a true test as far as increment of the component is concerned. Let's wait for it. And there you go. There is one written now. And if I maybe simulate the click 4 times, this means that there are 4 clicks. And what that should do is that should give me 4 as the output. There you go. Console log 4 is the output. Now that can be expected, like expect this to be 4. All right, something like this can be done, and the test case would pass. All right, 5 tests are passing. 2 tests I believe are written in here. One is our hello.test.js, or 2 tests are written there, and then there is an app.test.js. Total 5 tests are passing. There are 3 test suites. One is for the app, one is for the hello, and one is for the counter.test.js. And this is passing. So you can already see that this actually allows us a mechanism like a headless browser kind of a thing, where we are actually dealing with the HTML of the component rather than dealing with the properties. And we are trying to basically mount the component. All right. So first of all, I would just like to know that this, what I've done as far as enzyme is concerned with the mount function, this is clear to all. Yes. Very good. What about other participants? I'd just like to know from all the participants that this is clear. Okay. So this being done, I would just like to cover the difference between what mount is and what shallow would be. So if I use mount or shallow in this case, it would not make any difference. And that comes from the definition of what mount and shallow is. So there is a concept called deep rendering and shallow rendering as far as unit test cases are concerned. And deep rendering, what it means is that if you render a component then any other component that is the child of that particular component is the one that would be rendered alongside the whole component render itself. So basically mount would render the current component plus all the HTML of the children of that particular component itself. So it'll go inside the whole nesting, inside the entire hierarchy. While shallow rendering, now you may have understood also that shallow rendering is something which is just rendering the current component, no children at all, doesn't go below the current level of the hierarchy. So let's say if the counter component has a couple of child components, they would not be rendered at all as far as shallow is concerned. And shallow rendering actually fits more in unit testing, because when you talk about unit testing, every component would have its own test case. It is a unit that you're testing. It is basically some part of code that you're testing that is the current component. So the rest of the components, that are the children of the component or the parent or any other things, doesn't need to be rendered or doesn't need to be tested when you're testing the current component itself. So other components would have their own test cases, and hence shallow rendering fits better because it would just be less resource intensive because it's not rendering the whole component tree. So in this case, there's only one component that we have, no children at all. So we can easily go for shallow, and we can go for shallow in here as well. And that would still work. The simple reason is that there's no component tree that we are accessing in here. So mount or shallow in this case doesn't make any difference. And you'd also see that the test case would pass in here. All right. And that doesn't make any difference at all. So I believe everyone is clear on what is shallow rendering and what is deep rendering. That is the difference between mount and shallow in Enzyme, right, everyone? All right. Very good. So this is the point where we are actually stopping the discussion about unit testing. But again, there is a lot of things that can be discussed as far as unit testing is concerned. There are certain things that would only come once you go into the whole unit testing scenario. But we are just trying to introduce ourselves to unit testing so that in future, if there is any unit testing that has to go, you don't feel alienated about the syntax of unit testing altogether. All right. So now we'd go for another small discussion on server rendering in React. So let me just close this out, and let me close this as well. Maybe I can just minimize it. Let me close this one, and let me just open up this terminal. CD into this folder and just do a yarn start. Now, what we are trying to discuss here is the server-side rendering. All right, and let me also get some programming, or not even programming, but some modification done in here as well. All right, so we do have the counter component, and let me just take the counter component into our app component.js. Let me import it over here, and let me just display it. All right, and I'll just maybe put it right above the header. And there you go. We have that counter working. So basically, this is your React.js application. Now, if I, for example, go for a view page source, and if I just check the application here, you would not see anything like a counter or anything like that. All you would see is the div ID root. And the reason for this is that it is a JavaScript application, and your JavaScript is already patched up to the body of your HTML. And once the whole file, or once the whole HTML of that index.html loads, then the JavaScript starts executing, and as a result of which you get these kinds of components displayed as far as the whole output is concerned. So this is only done after your component is loaded, that is post loading. So this is quite natural. It is a JavaScript application. Everything is on the client side only. But the problem with this would be the problem that SEO has. Search engine optimization would not be possible with this kind of a structure. Now, the reason why that might not be possible is that any bots, any search engine bots like Google or Bing or any search engine bots would crawl your web page. And once they crawl the web page, they'll not get much of an information about what is going on inside the application. They'll not get the content except for this div ID root. And as a result, your page would not be ranked at all because there's nothing that they can find. Now, if you think about Airbnb-like website, or if you think about a shopping portal, for example, you have the React as a front end. In that case, imagine if your product detail page looks okay, all right, looks very okay, but in the view page source, it just has this div ID root. It will be very big impact as far as the SEO is concerned. So I believe that you're clear on this aspect. First of all, that simple React.js application, it's very difficult to implement search engine optimization because the source of the web page, it's not crawlable at all. First of all, that has to be clear. Please let me know. All right, very good. What about other participants? And like I have one use case from one of the companies at Ahmedabad itself, where they wanted to go for a React frontend on a Magento-based backend, and that was an approach that was taken in the lights of the fact that Magento 3.0 might just go for the React frontend altogether. So why not try React frontend with Magento 2.0 itself, so that the developers would be familiar to the new Magento version, right? So that being said, everyone was doing their own research. They were doing some R&D. Then I was called in for the training of people and all, and then I saw this where they were not using server rendering, and the product detail page on the source looked like this. Maybe the product listing also looked like this. So I just explained them that this would cause problems in SEO, and you should be using either you should be either going for some custom server-side rendering. That is also possible, which is where you can create a Node.js server. You can have a React.js application rendered there, and because everything is JavaScript, you can prepare your application on the server, and then you can send the response. So that is still possible. Custom server-side rendering is possible. And then there are certain paid tools, like there is something called Phantom JS, I guess. Phantom JS. This one is a free one, but there is a paid version of this Phantom as well. This actually gives you another way of a headless browser. That way you can prepare things on the server and send it over to the client. So before this Next.js and Gatsby and all was invented, Phantom JS was the most popular choice for server-side rendering. It allows you to open a web page, and it allows you to get the content and render the web page, and all those things can be done. But then this Next.js came in, so I made them use the nextjs.org, and then they were successfully able to implement it. So that was a good news. But this Next.js, it's really good as far as server rendering is concerned, and my choice as well to go for SSR is mainly Next.js itself. So when I use Next.js, you would be able to eject your current application from Create React App and then use Next.js in there as well. Or you can go for a Create Next App toolchain that would simply create a Next.js project. But the Next.js project would already be server rendered. So you may want to go into the whole Node.js aspect to learn what is server-side rendering, or basically what happens internally. There are so many documentations available there online, but Next.js abstract the whole thing for you, and it just presents to you just a React.js kind of an application, which you can easily modify, manipulate, and so on. All right, so I would be just implementing server-side rendering. I would not be explaining what server-side rendering is. All right, and we'll see how things pan out to be. We'll see how things go. All right, so Next.js is the one that we'd be using for server rendering, and then there are other tool chains as well available for server rendering as well. So let me just close everything up and let me create a next application. So similar to create React app, there is a create next step that is possible. Let me just stop this. So it'll be like npx create next app, and let's say I'll just call it Ssr Demo. And you can see that it installs React DOM, doesn't install React scripts, but instead it uses the Next framework. And that is installed. Let's wait. Okay. And then it tells us to cd into Ssr Demo and go for a yarn dev. All right, so I'll just cd into Ssr Demo. I'll open it up in my editor, and I'll also show you what are the scripts that are available for us to run. So in the package.json, there is a start which would give us a next start. There is a build script that will give you a build, and there is a dev that is next dev that will be happening. So I would go for the dev script, and let's see what it gives us as a return value. So yarn dev, and this would right away give us the server. Server started on localhost 3000, and I can open the server on localhost 3000 in the browser. And this should give us a next application. Yep, there you go. There is this whole inside the pages. There is an index.js that gives you the entire home page, and it is just exporting a function home. This is also one way of exporting a function specifically. All right, nothing else can be exported this way. So that is there. So what I'll do is I would create another page, and I would create a functional component, and I'd export it right away in a similar fashion like this does. All right, so I would, for example, I create a file inside the pages called about.js. All right, and look at how easy the Next.js thing makes it for us. All right, I'll import. Oh, I actually don't have to import anything in this particular case. I'll just do an export default about, and that's it. Export default function about. It's a functional component, and this would return us, let's say, a React fragment. You don't have to import React for this, and React is automatically imported, so you don't have to do that. And let's say I go for an h1 saying about us, and maybe an HR, and maybe a paragraph. Let's say saying this is an about us page, something like this. All right. So as soon as I do this, you would have one route created automatically, which says about whatever the name of the component is. You would be able to go for about, and you can see that you get the whole about us page available in here right away. So you don't have to import React. You don't have to do anything with Next. It has already been set. All you need to do is create one page after the other, and you get the output. Let's say, for example, I create a contact us page, for example. Let's say contact us.js, and I'll maybe just copy this whole thing and just go for contact. All right. And if I go with contact us, I guess it's the page name that I'd have to go with. There you go, contact dash us, the file name, I'm sorry, that gives you that whole contact component altogether. So you can see that really seamless the way Next.js gives us the capability to get pages created. And the good thing about this is if I go for a view page source, because there is a Node.js server running in the background, you would see that somewhere over here, let's say after the head tag, let me just maximize the fonts. Yep, here is the body, and inside the body you get the h1 that is contact us, hr, and then there is some paragraph that is there. So this particular page, it is actually crawlable. This doesn't give you just that div id root kind of a thing. It gives you the entire content of the body as well. It gives you the whole JavaScript and all, but it at the same time it gives you the whole body. So what happens in this case is the whole page is prepared on the Next.js server, and then it is rendered to the client. Everything is more or less happening internally, but this is a crawlable web page. All right. And for all the Next.js, you'd have an ID is equal to underscore underscore next is equal instead of ID is equal to root. That's how you can recognize that it is Next.js that we are talking about, right? So this, plus you can also go for anchor tags. So say for example, maybe if I want to go for a navigation, so I can import something like from next slash router. There is a router available in which there is, I think there is a link, or there is actually a link tag, but I'm not sure why it's not showing to me. Let me just check it out. Next router. Yeah, there is next from next link and not next router. Okay, so you can go for an import of link from next slash link. All right, and you can simply go for a link. For example, you can go for a nav tag to start with, and the nav would have a couple of links or 3 links. So link slash link home. This would take us, this is the syntax is almost the same as the, you know, as the React router DOM syntax. So home, about, take me to the about us, and contact us. That'll take me to contact us. All right. So this nav link from next.link is important to have. That would actually, you know, work in an SEO aspect as well. There is an unhandled. Yep, there is an href also that we'd have to provide in here. So let's provide that as well. So when you go for link, there is also an href that you should provide in here. So href, same particular location. This is just for the SEO purposes, but the actual to attribute is the link that we are going for. So about and href contact us. All right. So you get the clickable links in here, and maybe just add a bit of a space in between. All right, and I'll also do the same thing in the home. Something like this can be done. So if I reload, you see that you have this home about, I think I may have to, Link is not defined. That's why. So I would have to import link everywhere. All right, so there we go. Home, about us, contact us, the whole thing is linked up. And you can see that it actually doesn't refresh the page. The whole routing type of a thing works as if it is a single page application. It doesn't actually affect the whole user experience, but it indeed gives you the whole feel of routing altogether. And at the same time, it gives you the entire page available as well. All right. So first of all, this whole setup, it's pretty basic. I mean, there's nothing to learn, but it's something that is good to know. So I understand that everyone gets what I did over here. Home, about us, and index and contact us, the way I created pages, and automatically the routing was created. So everyone gets this. All right, very good. What about other participants? Very good. And you can also notice that inside the index there is a head that has been imported from next/head. It is also quite important. If I go to the about us, for example, you can see that the title bar doesn't show a proper title. If I even go for a view page source, there'll be no meta tag that might be available. So all those things can be handled by the head tag that we import. Head from next/head. All right. Head/head. Anything that you provide inside head/head would be considered the head portion of your page. That's how it will treat it. So for example, in the about us, if I go for title, all right, title/title. Similarly, in the contact us page, I'd also go with the title/title. You can have any meta description, meta keywords, all those kinds of tags are still possible for the head tag. This is again very much focused on SEO only. So as soon as I do that, you can see that the about us, the title itself changes over here. And oh, I'd have to in the contact us, I'd have to import head. Okay, and there you go. So contact us, and there you go, the contact us title, about us title. Homepage already has a title, so we don't need to bother about that. And that is basically something that would also change, which is again, like if I go for contact us and if I now go for a view page source, you'd see that the title also becomes contact us in here. So that is there, plus about us as well. If I go for a view page source, the title becomes about us. Let's see. Yep, there you go. The title is about us in here. So things are pretty much easy. Once you know React, this becomes really easy. But internally, there is a lot going on as far as server-side programming is concerned. There's a Node.js server that is working in the backend and all. So if you want to implement server-side rendering, then it is always a good idea to learn Node.js first and then go for some server-side rendering implementation on React. But as far as the implementation is concerned, like this would take you up till some point where there'll be not much of a problem in implementing things. If you just know React and no Node.js at all, this will still take you till some point where there'll be no problem in implementation as well. All right, but I believe everyone gets the whole idea of server-side rendering and why it is used as far as React is concerned, and about the implementation of Next.js as well. Yes, everyone. All right. All right, very good. What about other participants? Would just like to know from all the participants here. Very good. So these are certain topics that I would like you to explore later on your own. And here is where we are ending our 12-day session on React.js with Redux. So I hope you had a great time, and thank you for having me with you. If you have any questions, please ask them. And if you don't, then just say 0 so that I can conclude the session. All right. Very good. What about other participants? Now, all these videos are available on YouTube, and you would be able to check them out as well. And a better way to make yourself more aware of React is go for some open source projects that are available on GitHub, review the code, and try to learn or try to study the way that project is coded, and so on and so forth. This might just take you to an intermediate level. From intermediate to advanced might be something that would be dependent on your side. All right, so this is it, guys, and we'll give you this video as well once I'm done processing it, and we'll give you the code as well for this particular day. So up till then, I would like to just say goodbye. Thank you and all the best. Take care.